Hi, I'm a bit of an Invincible theorist myself, and today I present to you a video that will maybe help hold you over until season 4 drops. I've made multiple theories on the origins of a select few of the Invincible variants that appeared last season, and I didn't cover all of the ones that you guys requested. So this video is basically a supercut of all of my super rad awesome variant theories along with a few brand new ones. The first one being,
I miss William.
now look, I think we all have heard the common theory amongst the masses that in this scene of Omni-Man interrogating William, instead of just putting a little dent in his car, he kills him. And obviously Mark would be upset because instead of putting dents in cars, he was putting a dent in William. Now, say this is what happened, and honestly, it is a pretty likely theory. I doubt Mark would be ecstatic to join the Empire after this. The thing is, this Mark stands out amongst the rest in sort of the same way I claimed Viltrum Mark did, but not quite. He's very soft-spoken, yes, but unlike Viltrumite Mark, this guy seemed to be enjoying himself, having a grand old time wiping 90% of the heroes off of the planet. So let's please not repeat the, oh, he didn't do anything wrong train that some of you guys had for Murder Invincible over here. Assuming that William is dead and that Nolan is the one that killed him, Mark fighting Nolan most likely did happen, and it's even likely that he killed him. Honestly, half of these variants have probably killed Omni-Man, and if you're confused as to how he could have pulled this off, it could have been a plethora of ways. Maybe Mark caught him off guard, maybe Nolan was weaker in this universe, maybe Nolan wasn't trying to kill Mark, but Mark was trying to kill Nolan. There's many ways it could have happened, but again, this is all assuming that Nolan is the one that killed William to begin with. I mean, he could have died from Doc Seismic for all we know. He could have fallen down a flight of stairs, or Mark could have killed him. I know, it makes no sense. Why would Mark kill William? Well, for one, I have to add a theory of Mark being the secret plot twist cause of all this to stay consistent with my other theories. And two, it's a more plausible possibility than you probably think. I made a joke about this in my previous video, but Mark's powers did activate randomly, right? Well, luckily for him, he happened to be doing a mundane task like throwing the trash away. But what if he were taking part in something a little more intimate? Not that intimate, but like, I don't know, a hug? Giving his old pal and possibly lover William a hug, and crack goes the back. He could have pulled an accidental Bane maneuver on him and killed him, which would also explain why he's referred to as maskless or no mask Mark. He's the only variant that doesn't wear a mask apart from the Viltrum ones, obviously, but that's because they're known members of the Viltrum Empire. This guy's outfit is akin to a traditional Invincible costume, but how does this relate to the prior scenario? Because it could have and most likely would have happened in a public setting, whether they were greeting each other or saying goodbye. Mark's accidental murder was on full display for everyone to see. Either way, we know that he doesn't really care for his identity. Even the worst of the variants, like Sinister Mark, covers his face. I like to think that some of them have a cool dynamic where they still have a secret identity, but just evil. Like, instead of secretly being a hero, they're secretly terrorizing the city and trying not to laugh when they watch the news with their friends. But yeah, this Mark doesn't have any of that. What do I always say? The costumes and design choices are very important. Since we couldn't receive origins for each variant, I'm sure their designs were intentional and made to give us as much visual information as possible. Him not wearing a mask has to mean something, and regardless of the reason, it couldn't have been a good one. But besides that, there ain't much more to say about the guy. So I guess I'll rapid fire some more for you. Prisoner Mark probably tried to fight against Omni-Man, lost, and was then held as a prisoner, and was, you know, probably tortured and stuff. Long hair Mark probably grew his hair out. Mohawk Mark is interesting, as in I kinda don't know how the heck to interpret his design. It's all kinda random. I mean, he has the inverse colors of Omni-Man, but he doesn't seem like he turned down his offer. Maybe he did fight against him or rebel against him for some other reason, but honestly I can't say. Flaxen Mark probably got trapped in that dimension in place of Nolan. Nolan is used to being in these sorts of predicaments, as we hear from Debbie, but Mark is obviously a different story. Not only was this very early into his super career, but he was and still is struggling with his morality. Being secluded in this place with an entire alien race trying to kill him would probably be enough to tip him over the wrong edge, if he became desperate enough. which he likely did. Mustache Mark was probably born on Viltrum or taken back there at an early age. No Goggles Mark likely got his powers at a younger age because of how childish he acts. Bald Mark has an ugly costume. Shiesty Mark has a thick accent, so maybe Debbie was from a different place and wasn't as good of a parent or something. And with all that being said, these are my theories for the origins of the fan favorites, starting with, "Aw, someone misses their mommy." Today we're talking about Full Mask Mark. Is there a reason he decides to cover his face? What happened to the Debbie of his universe? Well, those are questions that I will attempt to make believable answers for. But unlike my videos about the previous variants, this won't solely be about his possible origin. I'd also like to put into perspective just how dangerous a variant like this could be. You know, some people wonder whether or not he's even evil, or if he even hurt anyone during the war. I'm sorry to burst you guys' bubble, but he's one of the few variants we see floating over a destroyed city. No one else did the damage for him, and I doubt he'd be able to level a city without any casualties. Besides, the fact that he's willing to work with a group of psychopaths and clearly evil people for his own personal gain is enough proof that he's far from innocent, or anything close to a hero. But let's not get too deep into that topic for now. Although Full Mask Mark didn't have too much screen time, with the time he did have, he made a pretty good impression on the Invincible fans. He was one of the only ones that seemed to be somewhat humane. Somewhat. Remember that word. I wouldn't be surprised if his life looked identical to our Mark's for a majority of it before the switch happens. The main thing this variant drives home is how much he misses his mom. So any theories of Debbie being absent from his life fly right out of the window. But then again, I doubt he mostly grew up with Omni-Man. Why? Because if Debbie was removed early on, he'd likely be conditioned to suppress his emotions, much like what we see from Viltrumite Mark. Even coming to the conclusion that she passes away later on in his life, we still have to figure out why and how. A lot of people would immediately assume that her passing would be a result of Omni-Man's actions. And while I do agree that that is very possible, I also think there's a very real chance that it was a result of Mark himself. So I'll go over the arguments for both stances, and if you guys know anything about my theories at this point, you'd know how heavily character designs come into play when creating them. Especially with someone like Art being the creator of most costumes, we know that as a part of his design process, he likes to get to know the person he's creating the costume for. Many people have already pointed out how Invincible's blue suit is a direct contrast to Omni-Man's costume. And what do you know? Mask Vincible has the same colors. I think this is a very intentional decision. We can't get full episodes devoted to each variant, so they sprinkle in little details and information through their designs. Taking this fact into account, we could easily make the argument that this isn't a Mark that sided with his father, which is interesting because he doesn't come across as ruthless as someone like Sinister Mark or as cold and calculating as Omni Mark, so it's very hard for me to imagine he offed his dad. Think of Omni Mark but flipped on his head. He's cold, no nonsense, and mature, all things you'd expect from Omni-Man. This variant, however, is a direct contrast. He's emotional, defensive, and conflicted, a lot more human. While it is possible that Omni-Man ended Debbie's life and that drove Mark into acting out of that human anger and offing him, that's not the only way things could have gone. She could have been severely injured due to collateral damage caused by the Chicago fight, or something of a similar scale that was caused by Omni-Man. Main Universe Mark already blames himself for everything, so his mom being one of the casualties caused in that fight would definitely weigh on him. If his Omni-Man was at all similar to ours, he probably wouldn't resist Mark's attempt on his life after realizing what he's done, and that could be the way Mark defeats him, as, you know, him giving up after offing the love of his life. Now, I know he says,
"Not all of us killed Mom."
But is he really a reliable source of information? He's more human than most of the other variants, right? And what do humans have a bad habit of doing? Lying. Not to mention, he doesn't seem to be stable. His words are a little frantic and he gets very defensive over small things. If he did actually off his mom, why would he want her back so badly, you may be asking? Because it was a mistake, possibly an accident, but probably a mistake. Accidents are actually different from mistakes because accidents are unintentional intentional, but mistakes can be intentionally made within that moment. A lot of people bring up the scene of Mark saying, "Make me," to Debbie shortly after getting his powers, almost as if it were a threat. It's clear that this Mark has a fragile self-esteem, and whenever it's put into question, he lets his emotions get the better of him. I feel like this is what makes him so dangerous. He can appear to be nice or approachable when you hear his motivations, but when you dig any deeper than that, you'd start to understand why Angstrom chose him to be part of the war. That's something else you have to take into account. Angstrom has the memories of other Angstroms, so he knows the worst of the worst when it comes to the variants, and this is one he chose. If Mark did off his mom and quickly come to regret it later, it'd make a lot of sense. Kind of like when people rage over video games and break their setup, or someone says something they don't mean in the heat of an argument. It would also explain why he wears a mask. Not because he's disfigured, but because he wants to hide from himself. He doesn't want to look in the mirror and see the face of the person that took his mother's life. Or Omni-Man just offed her to make him sad. Among the many variants that showed up in episode 7 of Invincible, Omni-Mark, for some reason, stood out amongst fans the most, alongside variants like Mohawk Mark, the GOAT Sinister Mark. Although I can't lie, No Goggles Mark might have been my favorite of them all, even with the tiny amount of screen time he got. Don't worry about spoilers for the comics, I haven't read them, so I'll solely be focused on the show. Besides, from what I've heard, he has more to go off of in the show anyways. If you didn't know, I made a Sinister Mark video about a week or so ago to try and dig up any information we could about the guy and figure out what made him the way he is. You guys enjoyed that video quite a bit, thank you by the way, and a lot of people were requesting an Omni-Mark video. So here you go, since you guys obviously don't care about my dreams of being a gamer. Now, we're gonna really need to exercise our creative juices today because Omni-Mark has even less screen time than Sinister Mark, whom we could barely piece together a feasible theory for. First, let's clear some things up. I hear many people say that he eliminated the Omni-Man of his universe. Whether or not that's true in the comics, I have no idea, but in the show, that isn't stated. Instead, Sinister Mark is actually the one who says that. The only concrete details we know about the boy is that he really hates Adam Eve for some reason. He doesn't like being near his house, and that's it. But luckily for you all, my mind works at a pace many would only dream of. Therefore, I've already seen countless possibilities and outcomes that would lead to the creation of Omni-Mark. Possibility number 1, Omni-Man's death. This may come as a curveball to many of you because I did just say that this version of Mark didn't eliminate his father, but that Sinister Mark did that to his father instead. While that is true, I didn't say that his death was a result of Mark's actions, but instead the driving force behind his actions. This theory stems from his hatred towards Eve and his home and his costume being inspired by Omni-Man's, almost like a tribute. I believe that it's possible that Mark looked up to his father similarly to how he did in the main universe. He wanted to be as strong as him, as cool as him, and just like him. But in this timeline, Omni-Man's attempt to take out the Guardians went a little differently, whether it was because he had a change of heart in the midst of the attack or the Guardians consisted of stronger members like Adam Eve. Honestly, I don't even know if those changes would be necessary. If Red Rush actually played his role and didn't try to switch to the offensive, then they could have won. The Guardians had a real chance against Omni-Man, but Red Rush threw that chance out of the window. And when faced with the decision to put Omni-Man down for good, we've seen the choice the Guardians would make.
Regardless, it's him or us.
I choose us.
Now, I understand many of you assumed that this version of Mark offed his father, but again, we have no confirmation of that in the show, and it's very clear that the show and the comics go about things very differently. So even if it was stated in the comics, that doesn't make it true to the show. But say we did lean more into that idea, his reasons for doing so would be far more personal, rather than just a random act of violence. Maybe he ended him in their fight in Chicago, but still wanted to honor him, and he carries this regret with him daily, which explains his more somber tone. My reasoning for that is, like I stated earlier, because of his costume. Everything's because of his costume. I can't see it as anything else other than a tribute, unless it's his idea of mocking him, or maybe Art just thought he'd be more fitting as Omni Boy. instead of Invincible, and he played more of a sidekick role. And to better fill out this sidekick role, he aided Omni-Man in his attack, and they successfully took over the world. I'm sure you're noticing a common theme here, but something is telling me that this has to be the case. Originally, going into this video, I was sure I'd have basically nothing to go off of. While that still is true, his costume alone produces a decent amount of possibilities as to what his origin is, but each sensible one leads to him idolizing Omni-Man in one way or another. As for his relationship with Eve, he seems to have it out for her even worse than the first evil variant of Mark we seen, who paralyzed his Eve. At least then, you could still tell he cared about her in his own twisted way, but Omni-Mark just flat out states that he hates her. Theorizing on a relationship can be a bit more dicey, since there's so many ways something like that can drive someone to do something they normally wouldn't, like cheating, breaking up with him, or maybe there was just no romantic relationship there to begin with, and my previous theory of her being involved in Omni-Man's death is more probable. There's no official art to further back this theory like we had in the last video, there's no lore drops, there's no nothing. And he had the audacity to get mad at the other Mark variant for swearing. Buddy, you are not Captain America. You are not standing for truth, justice, and the American way, or whatever, like Superman. So, you know, how are you gonna get so mad at him for cursing when you literally people, you know, you people, and not only do you do that to people, you probably enslaved your entire universe for all we know, and you literally snapped Eve's leg in half. So you go on to do that, to physically harm a superhero and to cause havoc upon all of these cities across the world, but you're gonna get mad at someone for saying a swear word? Boy, I oughta. You know, now that I'm talking about it, what if this is a part of his lore? What if, you know, he was playing Fortnite and he got mad and he started swearing, and then Omni-Man came upstairs to teach him a lesson, you know, because he was like, what are you doing? You're not even supposed to be up this late. You need to stay off those video games, get your grade up. And Mark was all like, oh, I didn't mean it, Dad, sorry. I didn't know I was cursing or something like that. And then Omni-Man disciplined him. And then that is what drove Mark to the point in which we see him. And that's why he has like PTSD from swearing, because he got beat up by Omni-Man for swearing. So that's just another theory I want to put out there. So as much as I hate to leave this off on a, you know, on a questionable note, not really getting to the bottom of anything, you guys have to understand, as cool as Omni-Mark looks, and things like that, with Sinister Mark, there was a lot more base, a lot more ground to cover. He is by far the variant we've gotten the most screen time with. We were introduced to him way earlier than all of the other variants. We were introduced to him last season, where he had about maybe a little less than a minute of screen time, and just that alone again gave us so much information about his character. He was hunting down Engstrom and his family, yada yada, his costume, and then he just is very open with his story, you know, about how he offed his dad, stuff like that. That's just something Omni-Mark does not give us. He doesn't really drop little Easter eggs or tidbits of information. The only thing he really tells us is that he hates Eve and he doesn't like his house. Today, we're talking about the most overhyped variant in the entire war. Just kidding, guys, calm down. Viltrumite Mark is super cool, even though he unfortunately had little to no dialogue, barely any screen time, and they didn't allow him to fight Spawn like he did in the comics. I feel like if they showed him fighting Spawn, he'd instantly gain way more respect from casual audiences than by defeating Wolfman. Putting all that aside though, continuing our series of theorizing what made these marks the way they are, Viltrumite Mark is next on the menu. Was he born with his powers? Was Debbie absent from his life? Or did he live a life similar to our marks, but fold under the pressure of the Viltrumite Empire's threat? We'll be going over these scenarios and hopefully finding the one that makes the most sense. You guys let me know what you think in the comment section, and whoever comes up with the best theory will be pinned. Anyone else notice how dead inside this guy looks 20 24/7, it's clear that he's either done things he isn't proud of or is a part of something he doesn't want to be a part of. This alone differentiates him from a fat chunk of the other variants who are usually just sadistic psychopaths one way or another. I feel like he does what he has to do and nothing more. We'll get more into that later. Scenario number 1, born with powers. This changes a lot, like a lot. This basically guarantees that he won't grow into the Mark we know and love. He likely wouldn't have as much of a social life, human experiences, or any things of that nature due to Omni-Man having a far bigger presence in his life early on. In this show, we saw how Omni-Man was unsure that he'd even get his powers, but in this universe, everything would be put into motion much sooner. Mark would be raised to understand the values that Viltrumites hold. He would be trained from birth to be a lethal and efficient Viltrumite soldier. He'd likely think that he had no choice and that this way of life is simply the one he unfortunately has to live. But where's Debbie in all this? In season 2, Engstrom states how in some universes, even Debbie sides with the Viltrumite Empire. We see time and time again how crucial Debbie's role in Mark's life is towards his development as a person. We see firsthand how her presence affects a young and ruthless Viltrumite like Oliver. Assuming this is one of those universes where Debbie joins Omni-Man and sides with the Viltrumite Empire, this Mark's life would truly be miserable. Any glimmer of hope or light he'd have would be gone. Why fight back when there's nothing to fight for? In the main universe, Mark had people to fight for. His mom, his friends, his girlfriend. But when both parents, the only people he could love from birth, are pushing him into one direction, it would almost be unnatural to go against it. Conquest recently gave us some insight on how lonely and dehumanizing it is to be in the Empire, especially as someone of power. Nolan is already an extremely powerful and highly respected Viltrumite. We see how crazy the potential of Mark is after only having his powers for a couple of years. I imagine if he were to be trained from birth, he'd develop much quicker, both mentally and physically. Yet still, he seems unhappy, unsatisfied, and simply unwanting. Unwanting to do these things, but he feels like he has to conquer countless planets and enslave countless people over the wide time frame of a Viltrum lifespan. But wait, if both of his parents are telling him he's doing the right thing, and he's honored in his empire, why would he be upset? He'd have no idea what he was doing was wrong. Not initially anyways. Earlier I posed a question. What if Debbie was absent from his life? How would that happen? Well, assuming this Mark was born with his powers, Debbie's pregnancy would be very painful to say the least. A super baby kicking and thumping on your internal organs for months probably isn't the best thing in the world for a non-powered human. Safe to say that if she somehow survived long enough to give birth to him, she wouldn't make it further than that, as messed up and as sad as it sounds. So imagine Mark learning this later in his life, or even early on, that just the act of him being born brought pain onto a loved one. Not only would he miss out on all the lessons of morality and humanity from Debbie, but he'd also feel obligated to play his part. I mean, throw in a little manipulation from Nolan telling him it's what she would have wanted, and he'd simply be fulfilling his mother's dying wish. Not doing it for the love of the game like Goggleless Mark, or being a heartless monster like Sinister Mark. I'm not gonna lie guys, that was some professional writing there. I deserve a raise. We're not done yet though. At the start of the video, I mentioned a different possibility. A universe that looked and played out very similar to our own, except Mark folded under pressure. As in most alternate realities, the Chicago fight would be the turning point. I thought of the possibility of having the change happen sometime later, like with the arrival of Conquest, but there were simply too many reasons that wouldn't work out. Invincible War wouldn't make sense whatsoever or be possible for this variant of Mark. He'd have more things to lose, like Oliver, and Nolan would have been fighting against the Empire by this point. So, sticking with the Chicago fight, Nolan would be able to successfully convince Mark to side with him. like he failed to do originally. Maybe he used better choices of words rather than calling Debbie a pet. Say what you will about Nolan, he's a very straightforward guy. With Mark at least, he was almost too honest, especially all at once to Mark. Maybe if he used manipulation tactics to appeal more to Mark's humanity, or took more time to plant those seeds of doubts in humanity, or explain more of the Viltrumite way in Mark's head over a period of time rather than just laying it all on him at once. I know everyone's moved on from Invincible War by now, but I can't. I've had a bit of a fixation, one might say, on something a bit more sinister. Cape Vincible, Sinister Mark, whatever you want to call him, what's his story? What made him the way he is? In this video, I want to use context clues and details from the show that might possibly give us a better idea of why he is the way he is. His first appearance in the show is season 2, episode 8. The scene starts with Angstrom and his son. His son talks about missing his mother, which to me implies that Mark had a hand in her disappearance. They hear a rumbling noise, and afterwards we see Mark finding Angstrom and his son. And we obviously see that this version of Mark has no problem disposing of a child. But there's a few things to unpack here. Firstly, he already knew Angstrom's name. This means that they have history, and he likely did kill his wife / son's mom. By that, we can also infer that he was actively looking for him, since he made fun of Angstrom for trying to hide from him, and the fact that he already killed one of his family members. The next time we see him is at the very end of season 3, episode 6. He doesn't do much here, he kinda just stands there, but in episode 7, he gives us a crazy lore drop.
I murdered my own father. You really think you're gonna take me down?
Not only does this make this guy a way bigger threat than we may have originally thought, but it also makes his origin way harder to figure out. Usually, these marks end up siding with their father, and that's what makes them the way that they are. But if he killed his own father, then what could have possibly been the driving force of his spiral off of the deep end? Or was it even a spiral to begin with? Maybe this was the true nature of his character from the beginning. He does survive the war and is one of the few remaining variants before they all get shoved into different dimensions by Angstrom, but we don't really learn anything else about his character at that point. So here's the best I could come up with. With the very little information we were given, I feel like there's multiple possible scenarios, but I'll only go over a couple. Now, this first one is actually different than you may expect. Assuming that everything went as it did in the main universe, a fight between Mark and Omni-Man eventually happened. We've seen how easily Mark can lose himself in a battle. His no-kill rule flies out of the window when he's blinded by rage. Whether it was because this variant of Invincible is stronger or their version of Omni-Man is weaker, Mark eventually got the upper hand. And when he did, he gave it all he had. Maybe he forgot to hold back, or forgot his no-kill rule, assuming he ever had one to begin with. But the thing is, when he tells us that he killed his own father, he says it with pride, not guilt or regret. I doubt it would have taken much convincing to get him to side with Viltrum, unless maybe he didn't like the idea of sharing custody of the planet with others. Omni-Man is one of the most powerful Viltrumites we've ever seen, and if Mark was able to take him out, presumably early on, there's a real chance that with more experience and age, he'd be able to take on stronger opponents. As for what would make him target Angstrom's family, who knows? Was there even a real reason? Or was Angstrom just unlucky enough to get personally picked on by this version of Mark? I wouldn't put it past him. Adding on to the list of things we barely know about this guy are his relationships. We have no idea if he has a Guardians of the Globe, a relationship with Eve, or even a mom in his universe. Unfortunately, I doubt that any of those people mentioned survived too long after Mark got his powers. But another interesting thing I thought of was his costume, more so how or why it was created. In our universe, we know that art is known for making basically everyone's costume. Literally, because art is what they use to draw the costume. Anywho, as part of art's process of creating these costumes for people, he likes to get to know them. Again, we have no idea how similar his universe is to ours, so he could have made the modifications to the suit himself after he killed Nolan or something. But assuming Art is the one who created the design, then this could possibly be a crucial piece of information. because that confirms the idea that Mark was different from the start. Maybe not sinister, but definitely different. His costume is bold, with a giant cape to feed into the larger-than-life aesthetic. The colors are striking, but more intimidating, with far more black than Mark's first costume. That's all I got. Or is it? Ta-da! I have this art. Well, it's a sketch, but still, we're working with crumbs here. And if this is anything to go off of, then it looks like this indeed was his original costume before his battle with Omni-Man. And he seems to be quite joyous after killing him. So with this, I present my last and possibly the most probable theory, if that art is anything to go off of. To put it simply, Nolan and Mark's roles were reversed. I don't mean that literally, since it's very unlikely Mark was sent to conquer Earth by Viltrum if he was born on Earth. I mean that Mark was the one on a seemingly unstoppable rampage. But unlike Omni-Man, it was for no real reason. And also unlike Omni-Man, he wasn't able to be reasoned with, like Mark did to Nolan in the main universe. Smiling as he murdered his father implies he was far too gone even before doing that. While we don't have much information about his backstory or his dimension, one thing we know for sure is that he is definitely the worst of the variants. Some may even call him Sinister. The things we have seen him do are already enough to convince people that this guy had to go. And if you know about the comics, then you know just how much more deranged and dangerous he gets. Maybe this whole video was pointless, and maybe there was truly no reason behind the things he did or the people he killed. Maybe he just enjoyed it. Maybe instead of eagerly waiting for his powers to kick in so that he could start to save people, he was instead plotting on how he'd destroy them. And bada bing, bada boom. Those are all my theories on all of these different variants of Invincible. I know I haven't covered many, but I wanted to put it all in one video because I have had people that are recently watching my videos asking me, oh, have you done this or can you do this? And I know all of it is available on my channel, but I figured why not put it all in one video to make it easier for newer people to find. And you know, if older viewers want to rewatch, maybe this is an easier way for them to do that as well. And also, you know, maybe if this is someone's first time seeing any of these videos, then boom, here it all is, laying it all flat on the line. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and don't worry, I know I made a post saying I was not leaving you Invincible fans dry, and this isn't what I was alluding to, so don't worry. I don't want you guys to think, oh, you hyped this up and it's just a supercut. No, I'm going to make another video about more variants, but not, you know, the official canon variants, but I was gonna, you know, dip into some unknown territory, as you've seen with Invincible. So we'll see how that goes. I don't know when that video is coming out, and it most likely won't even be my next video, but yeah, just stay tuned, and I hope you guys enjoyed.